Hello, and welcome to Threads of Fate, a podcast all about astrology, divination, and the threads of fate that weave throughout all of our lives. I am your host, Kira Ryberg, and today we are going to be talking about the astrology of February 2026. And it is going to be a big month. We get the start of eclipse season this month. We also have the long awaited Saturn Neptune conjunction. We have Uranus stationing direct in Taurus. We've got a Mercury retrograde. We've got a lot to talk about. So let's just dive right in. Things really get going immediately when we jump into this month because there is a full moon in Leo on February 1st. Now, while this full moon is not technically an eclipse, it is a little bit of a foreshadowing for eclipse season because that is going to get going in earnest on February 17th when we have our first eclipse in Aquarius. Now, because this full moon is in Aquarius and the eclipse, or sorry, this full moon is in Leo and the eclipse is in Aquarius, that is activating the same house axis. So the topics that we find in that area of your life and in those parts of your chart are going to be coming up right when we start the month on February 1st with the full moon, and that it's going to get even more loud, prominent when we get moving into having eclipses in those signs later in the month. So you can think of this one as a little bit of a foreshadowing. I think it's really going to pull us into a questioning around how we approach these topics right now. It is going to reveal something about our personal philosophy around how we approach the Leo and Aquarius areas of our life. And it is really going to call into question whether or not you feel like you are pursuing a path that is authentic and true to you, that you can be proud of in those areas of life or not. And that lays the groundwork for some of those bigger shifts that are going to be happening once we get eclipses in those signs. So let me go ahead and bring up the chart for this full moon, and we can go ahead and talk about it a little bit more. So the moon is going to be in the second decan of Leo. If you want more insight on that, I just put out an episode with Chloe Margarita on the second decan of Leo. So be sure to listen to that for more insight on the story of that part of the zodiac. Then we have the sun in the second decan of Aquarius alongside Venus. We've got Mercury in Aquarius. We've got Mars and Pluto kind of still closely conjunct at the time of this full moon too. So there's a little bit of tension here. It's a little bit explosive because Mars is there making things prickly, but there's also a salve and a soothe and a desire for harmony and equality and justice and beauty because of Venus. And even though those principles often feel conflicting, that's part of the beauty of astrology, is that it says that both can exist in tandem. Sometimes we don't get the beauty without the pain. Sometimes we don't get the peace without the war. Sometimes we don't get, the social harmony without being able to address and navigate conflict as a group, right? Those are all ways in which Mars and Venus can both be active and present at the same time, and not necessarily conflict with each other's meanings, but inform them. So when we have the moon happening, the moon at the second decan of Leo opposing that sun in the second decan of Aquarius, there comes into question a deep question around whether or not we feel like we belong. That second decan of Leo yearns to be a part of something, to go your own way and have it be something that feels really true to you, but also to fit in, to have a level of acceptance and recognition for the things that you are contributing to whatever area of life Leo is associated with in your chart, right? But this moon is ruled by the sun in Aquarius. The sun is in detriment in Aquarius. It's not a very happy or comfortable place for the sun to be. And it can bring up challenges around self-worth, around confidence, around feeling like you are on the outside of a structure, of a society, of a system, of a group. And that can be really challenging. And we can see here that this moon has a yearning and an emotional need for recognition and inclusivity and to belong and to really feel worthy just because, rather than worthy because I accomplished something, right? So there's this desire to be seen and celebrated. It wants a moment at the top, and it really has to develop a personal philosophy that can help us navigate the changing world around us and our changing worlds personally. 2026 is a massive year. It is the year where everything changes. And to approach that with grace and acceptance for all that we don't have control over and all that we would like to see shift, we have to understand our true core nature, approach, and philosophy to life, right? To our selfhood, to our personhood, to our unique path. And this full moon brings that story up. And it's going to feel like a pull between wanting to be seen and not wanting to be seen, wanting recognition and not wanting recognition, right? The sun in Aquarius struggles with those things. And it can feel like there is a call to be really honest about your desires and what you want, even when it's pokey because Mars is there and uncomfortable. And even when there is a potential for other people to witness you in that space and to provide care and comfort because Venus is there. You might get a little bit of both, being really honest about what you want and where you feel like you are and what your personal philosophy is. Might piss some people off because of the opposition to Mars. That's okay. What's nice about this full moon is that the moon is separating from Mars and Pluto and applying to the sun, of course. And then after that, will apply to the opposition to Venus and then to Mercury. So there is opposition, even so, that's not the softest, smoothest, most gentle aspect, but it still brings in this Venusian component of care that I think is really necessary when we are doing this kind of deep interrogation of ourself and of what we believe in, what we are inspired by, and what we want to pursue. Right? The moon is seeking that comfort of acceptance, and the sun places us outside of that dynamic. The sun in the second decan of Aquarius, right? It fights the cringe and it fights the recognition and it says it doesn't matter, but it's still the sun at the end of the day. And the sun wants to shine. The sun can't help but shine. So I think the story that we are going to be seeing around this full moon is that there is a deep need to be honest with ourselves about where we actually like to fit in and where we'd actually like to stand out, where we fight being accepted, perhaps to our own detriment, right? And where we could actually be a little bit kinder and more gracious with ourselves and other people as we figure out our personal paths. You know, I feel like there's just so much going on in the world right now that makes it really hard to prioritize the self, and this full moon speaks to that dynamic. It's like, well, what if what's best for me isn't what's best for the collective, right? What am I doing to contribute to the wellness of the greater society? Because that is what we are concerned with in Aquarius, right? It is going beyond the needs of the self to focus on the many, to improve and to kind of idealize what the best world could look like. And sometimes that means that we are going to have to place our own needs and wants and desires beneath those of the other or the group or the collective. And we're going to feel that tension point emerging with this full moon. So ask yourself, what houses does this full moon occupy for you, right? Is this a first, seventh situation? Are you really trying to figure out what your personal philosophy is in life and in relationships so that you can show up better for yourself and walk an authentic, true path? And so that you can also support other people in their own becoming, even when it's uncomfortable for both of you? Or is it your second and eighth house axis? Are you navigating how you can approach finances and self-support and shared resources and the nature of reciprocity in your relationships more honestly and authentically? And are you going to have to maybe acknowledge where things are out of balance for you in those areas of life so that you can return to a state that feels better for both parties? Even if there's some conflict involved or a difference in values, which is something that this moon Venus opposition can represent as well. Is it the third and ninth house axis? Are you negotiating what is an authentic path for you to learn, right? To get involved in your community, in your local community, right? Versus your global community. There's a local component to the third house and a global component to the ninth house. And so there can be this push and pull with how do I show up in my immediate space in a way that I still prioritize what I need to do, but that I'm also serving those around me, right? Fourth and 10th, this is going to show up in your family dynamics and then the work that you're doing out in the world. And the 5th and the 11th, we're bringing up that nature of a collective community or a large group of people. Again, in the 11th house, and the 5th house is a little bit more what's intimate, what feels good to you, your pleasure, your children, your romance, your hobbies, right? How does that place you on the outside of a dynamic that you might really wish to be on the inside of? And how do you navigate that friction internally and externally? And then on the 6th and 12th house axis, that can bring up things around health both physical health and mental health, the need for rest, and the call to be engrossed in the mundane material world. And a lot of this, I think, is about kind of developing an idea of where we're at right now, what our philosophy is to this area of life, to this nature of authenticity, and how we feel about that, and the discomfort that might arise when we truly step in to who we really are without the ideas and the notions of who we should be placed upon us, right? This is going to be the foreground for a lot of the change and development that is going to come down the line once we have the eclipses getting going on February 17th. And I'm kind of of the mindset that eclipses really are a 2 week on either side time span. So after this full moon, we move directly into the pre-eclipse vortex where time starts feeling weird. Things are really active at a different kind of pace where we are getting pulled into these fated storylines. And this is the kickoff point. So expect things to start getting a little bit chaotic. That is part of eclipse season. And knowing where this is taking place in your chart can really help you understand what areas of life are going to be up for review at this time. And remember, we've got Venus and Mars and Mercury all here. And when Mercury is present, one of the best things that we can do is to communicate, right? To talk about it, to have a sounding board for all of this internal conflict that we are feeling so that we can bring it out, expose it, and hopefully find some peace, some unity, and some support from other people, right? There's a question here around how our identities are being shaped by the violence that is occurring in the collective right now, how we can show up with an element of care and compassion. How can we help, right? And some of that is going to come through just talking about it. So don't be afraid to have hard conversations around this time. They might be the thing that also gets you deeper in touch with where you are right now, how you feel about your current path, and what is going to help you move towards one that feels even more true to self. So that's the first full moon, really chill and calm. And just an interesting way to start the month, we'll say. February does not hold back any punches. So on February 4th, we are going to have Uranus stationing direct in Taurus. This is really the beginning of the end of the Uranus and Taurus transit. Uranus is not going to re-enter Taurus again, and it is truly starting to take those final steps forward towards Gemini, which Uranus is going to enter in a couple of months. This puts kind of an exclamation point on things in the Taurus part of our chart. It is the final shifts and tugs and changes to the Taurus area of our lives that need to happen. And something that I've just been thinking about so much is how Uranus does not feel, even though we don't have like dignity for the modern planets in the same way that we do with the traditional ones, right? Like in a Hellenistic framework of astrology, Uranus is not the ruler of Aquarius. Uranus does not rule a sign, right? That is a role that is reserved for, the sun through Saturn in terms of the planets. But however, I do think that the outer planets can have affinities with certain signs, right? There's just certain ones that are more supportive of their essential nature. Uranus is a planet of change and innovation, of rebelling, of going against the status quo. It is a revolutionary at heart. And in Taurus, we find what is fixed, what is immovable. It is earth that does not change, right? And so there is a rootedness and a groundedness to Taurus that I think Uranus struggles against a lot. And I think Uranus moving into Gemini is going to feel very different because that is a sign that is associated with change, with flexibility, with adaptability, with innovation, which are all principles that Uranus is a lot more aligned with. So as we go through this next couple of months of having this final Uranus and Taurus transit, I think it is going to bring up some deep rooted things that need to shift, but we are probably going to fight against those a lot more because we are not accustomed to having to shift the things that we are so deeply rooted into in that area of our lives, depending on where Taurus falls in your chart, right? Gemini is a sign where things are shifting constantly because Mercury moves so quickly. One day Mercury is really close to the sun. The next day Mercury is applying to another planet. Oh, now Mercury is retrograde. There is a natural relationship to flexibility in the Gemini part of our lives just on a baseline because of that. Whereas with Taurus, it's much different, right? We tend to have a more rooted, grounded, stable, consistent, reliable approach to that area of our lives. So you can expect that this is kind of the last everything that needs to shift, that you haven't changed, that Uranus has been trying and trying and trying over the last 7 years to move in that area of our lives. It's going to come up and it's going to ask us to make those shifts, right? As uncomfortable as they may be. And because change is so uncomfortable in Taurus, it's probably not going to feel super good. It might feel a little destabilizing and probably very surprising. This is going to be the most intense and impactful for anyone who has placements around 24 to 30 degrees, because Uranus stations around 27 degrees of Taurus. So if you've got any placements within like 3 degrees of that, that is going to be felt in fixed signs. So that's Aquarius, that's Leo, and that's Scorpio, in addition to Taurus, of course. So you're really going to start feeling this call to say, okay, I thought I was going to change this thing. I haven't yet. And now I really feel like there's a sense of urgency around it. Uranus often brings up that sense of urgency, that if I don't do it now, I'm going to combust. And that's what causes us to take really powerful actions in a way that seem shocking or unanticipated to other people. But internally, it feels like, well, if I don't make this change, then something is just going to feel so not correct within me that there's no choice. And that is what we are going to see really kind of be amplified on February 4th and in the days that follow, as Uranus stations direct and starts looking ahead. Now, we also, around the same time on the 7th, get Venus squaring Uranus while Uranus is still kind of in that process of stationing direct. Even if it is a day that the planet stations direct, they stay at that same degree. They move very, very slowly. So it's kind of a process rather than a singular moment in time. So a couple days after, on February 7th, we're going to get that Venus square to Uranus, which can spark changes in our values, in our desires, our relationships, what we're attracted to, our creative practices, right? It's a little bit of a, well, what if I just went after the weird thing instead? What if I made the change in my relationship that I've been too scared to voice? It kind of calls on us to embrace chaos and disorder and difference, and to find it appealing and to find it almost electrifying. It opens up the realm of what is possible, especially when it comes to the things that we are so deeply, deeply entrenched in, like we are in Taurus. And so I think that Venus Uranus square is going to also highlight the Uranus station in a way where you might not feel much happening on the 4th, but once the 7th comes in and we get that Venus square, it's going to be like, oh, my values around this area of life are changing, and I need to make changes that accommodate those shifts in feelings and dynamics, both internally and externally. So, you know, just kind of expect some differences in the ways that you're approaching the Taurus part of your chart, but also the way that you are approaching Venus topics as a whole. You know, most people tend to feel like it's going to be some super major thing. And if it's hitting your chart in a really pronounced way, and you're in either a Taurus perfection year or a Libra perfection year, and you've got Venus activated, then you might feel it more. But otherwise, it might be like, I don't really feel like eating this food anymore. I don't really feel like listening to that music anymore. Oh, I got really interested in this movie or in this genre, right? It can also just be a change in your tastes and preferences, but sometimes it can ignite something much more deep and profound, like a realization that a certain relationship isn't working for you anymore, or that you want to open up your relationship and explore different types of dynamics and the ways that you are connecting with other people and relating to individuals, to the collective, right, to your community. So there can be really profound shifts, but astrology is largely lived in the mundane every day. And a lot of times transits are going to reflect more everyday, mundane sort of situations. You can also think about what Venus is responsible for in your chart to see where and who might be going through changes outside of yourself, right? If Venus rules the 3rd house, this could be speaking to a change that is happening to your brother or your sister or your cousin, right? If it's your 7th house, this could be about your partner. It doesn't always have to be personal. So always remember to keep it within the context of your own chart, but that those general significations do indicate that we're going to start seeing some shifts around our priorities, our preferences, and our desires around the 7th when we get that square. Before we get that square, though, on February 6th, Mercury is going to enter Pisces. And so this is going to be a big shift because Mercury tends to do pretty well in Aquarius. Mercury likes being there, and it's a nice thing when you're in a Mercury perfection year. So if you're in a Gemini or a Virgo perfection year, and if you have no idea what that is, I've got a blog post on my site for free that tells you everything that you need to know. So go check that out. But it basically is talking about what areas of life are getting activated for you and what planet is calling the shots for a given year of life. So if you're in a Mercury perfection year, hold on, because Mercury in Pisces is going to be a little bit tougher. Pisces is where Mercury finds its detriment and its fall. So it's a particularly hard spot for Mercury to be in. That doesn't mean that Mercury can't do Mercury things. It just means it's going to have a much different approach, right? I always think of Pisces, Mercury and Pisces as kind of being word soup a little bit, right? It goes here and there and everywhere, and everything is kind of mixed together. It doesn't have the same level of directionality. It doesn't always have a point to make. It kind of finds it along the way. But Mercury in Pisces is also really beautiful for communicating in non-traditional ways, right? This isn't the most logical or rational approach. This is what feels good for me. What is aligned with my values? What do I love, right? This is the, friend who sends you a playlist or like a song to talk about how they're feeling about a situation. This is a very poetic chart signature, and there are many ways that it can express that feel really attuned to more artistic and non-verbal forms of communication rather than being able to have a conversation with someone and feel like it's really, really clear. And Mercury is going to be in Pisces for a while because Mercury is going to station retrograde in Pisces later this month. So we are going to be kind of in a place where communication gets a little fuzzier and a little bit harder to understand each other sometimes with Mercury and Pisces. And that's okay, but it does mean that if you're in that Mercury perfection year, the planet that's calling the shots for you this year of life is going to be in tougher shape. So you're probably going to feel like you're in tougher shape too. It can be a little bit more confusion. It can feel a little bit harder to know what you want to say, how you want to communicate it, to express yourself in a way that feels really good. And I feel like that's because Pisces is Jupiter's domicile. It's Venus's exaltation. It is a sign that is concerned with compassion and love and beauty. And try as we might, we can never quite capture that in words, right? It is a feeling that is so enormous, that is so meaningful, that is so powerful that words will simply never do it justice. And that doesn't mean we don't try. We do plenty of poems and songs and books and movies and all of the different things have attempted to be able to communicate feelings with words. And we fall short a lot of the time, right? But it's still a noble endeavor. And that means that you might be trying to communicate about your feelings and feel like you're falling short. So potentially try non-traditional ways, send a song that makes you feel like this is exactly how I feel, right? Write a poem, do something that brings you into a little bit more of like an imaginal creative space when you're looking for ways to communicate with others and hold space for the fact that it's probably not going to feel super clear, right? All of the things that Mercury is responsible for, communication, transportation, commerce, all of that might feel a little bit harder. You might run into more delays and difficulties, especially as Mercury gets closer to the retrograde station that happens later in the month. But yeah, that's a little bit on Mercury in Pisces, just less logical, less rational, more poetic, more feeling. And, it does also represent the start of us beginning to rethink the way that we are approaching the Pisces part of our lives. All of the Mercury retrogrades this year happen in water signs. So there's going to be this blend of how do I think about the way that this is feeling for me, right? And kind of trying to reorient ourselves around those areas of life. And we're starting with Pisces. So consider where the Pisces house is in your chart specifically, and know that you are about to rethink think and redevelop your approach to this area of life. It's going to get a little bit of a rebrand, and that comes from doing a little bit of that personal interrogation around how you truly feel about that area of life and whether or not it is something that is bringing you fulfillment or whether it is something that is sucking you dry. All right. That's Mercury and Pisces. They're going to station retrograde later in the month on February 26th, but they enter on the 6th. So, like I said, going to be there for a long time. So we just kind of have to get ready for a whole lot of Mercury and Pisces, and hopefully it will make us communicate with a little bit more empathy with one another because, God knows we need it. All right, February 10th, Venus is going to enter Pisces. This is a bright spot in the month, you guys. Venus is exalted in Pisces. She loves to be in this sign. She's going to be in a trine to Jupiter, who is the ruler of Pisces. There's a really supportive, harmonious relationship happening here. This brings some ease back into our connections. It brings a lot of just more of a focus on relating and empathy and generosity and kind of trying to see things from another person's point of view and wanting to prioritize relationships over, potentially like personal success, right? It shifts our focus in a way that is really delicious and sweet and gentle and supportive. And so, I think in a lot of ways, it's just going to bring up this awareness that connection matters, humanity matters, generosity matters, belief matters, right? That we have to find a spark of hope in all of this difficulty to hold on to. And my hope is that Venus in Pisces gives us a little bit of that, both personally and collectively. This also is going to be really nice for anybody in a Venus perfection year because this means that Venus is going to be gaining in dignity. So you should be feeling a little bit better, especially after you go through some of those internal shifts and changes with Venus and Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus, right? We had a deeper awareness around our shifting desires and priorities. And now all of a sudden we are entering into a space where there's a little bit more ease around those topics. So that's a nice thing to see because it means that some of those changes that we felt compelled to make and act on are well received in a couple of days' time. So this is really nice. It does definitely bring a boost to the Pisces part of your life, especially if you're a night chart. So you can expect a little bit more support there throughout Venus's transit through Pisces, which is just, it's always nice to see. Venus is going to be conjoining the North Node while she's in Pisces, which is an interesting one. One of my favorite little tidbits is that Venus is said to be the only planet who likes being next to the North Node, and the rest of the planets do not do very well around the North Node. And, it's like Venus is responsible for love and sex and pleasure and joy and delight. And it's like, yeah, the North Node has a tendency to exacerbate whatever it touches. And it's like, can we ever have too much love, too much compassion, too much peace, too much care, too much pleasure? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a nice thing to see. And it amplifies our hunger for those topics. So you might start to feel a little bit more like, ooh, like I really want to enjoy myself more. And I'm going to put my time and my energy and my resources towards that, right? Towards doing the things that actually make me feel good, feel beautiful, feel desired and desirable day in and day out. So it's a nice one to see. It's definitely a bright spot in the month, which is otherwise a little bit rough and tough around the edges just because of some of the eclipse energy that is going to be building around this time and the looming Saturn transit into Aries, which happens just a few days later. February 13th for those in the States, February 14th for those of us in Europe. Now, this is a big one, you guys. Saturn doesn't change signs every day, right? Saturn spends about 2.5 years in a given sign. We had a little bit of a preview of Saturn in Aries last year because Saturn dipped its toe into Aries from, I believe, May 25th to September 1st, and then went back into Pisces. And we kind of finished up the storyline there. Now, this means that we are fully, well, and truly entering into the Aries era. Neptune has already moved in and Saturn is going to be joining the party. Now, my kind of keyword title for this transit is painful creations. What do you want to create? What do you want to make? That first part of Aries is so concerned with treading new ground, being an innovator, making something new, going where no one has gone before. I highly recommend listening to the Aries 1 Decan episode that I did with Chloe Margarita, because we are going to be doing that energy a lot. I call it blood, sweat, and tears. What do you want to pour your blood, sweat, and tears into? Right, to bring it to fruition, to show up for, even when it's hard, even when the spark of passion has fizzled out, even when you're not excited about it anymore. What do you want to create there in a scrappy, under-resourced kind of way? Because Saturn is in fall in Aries. Saturn doesn't do super well there, right? It's a little bit tense for Saturn to be in this place that is so hot and dry, and Saturn is very cold and dry. So you can imagine it's a very big temperature shift. It's almost like culture shock for Saturn a little bit. Like he goes into Aries, he's like, what is this place? I feel like I am not built for this heat. I'm not built for this intensity, this speed, right? Aries moves fast, Saturn moves slow. There is a problem in pacing that shows up with Mars and Saturn all of the time, but especially Saturn moving through Aries, it can be harder because Saturn wants to build things that last. Aries isn't so good at the follow through. It's really good at initiating, having the idea, right? And then delegating it to someone else to finish through and see through to completion. Saturn is a little bit more about playing the long game, right? Like, where is this going to go in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? Because Saturn's not going to come back to Aries for 30 years. So it's trying to lay a really solid foundation in this place. And oftentimes that starts by us coming into a deeper awareness around what isn't working. In order to build a solid foundation, you have to know what is sturdy and what isn't. And Saturn is going to make us all too aware of the different parts of the Aries part of our chart that aren't actually as stable and rooted as we think they are, which is already not something that Aries is really well known for. But say this is your 10th house, right? You might feel like, okay, like I've got my career, I'm pretty sure about how I want to approach things publicly. I've got an idea of the praxis of my life, what I'm doing, right? Where I'm pouring my energy into. And then Saturn comes in and you might realize that the path that you have been kind of crafting for yourself and going down in life is not actually as sturdy and solid as you think, and that you're not as excited about it or as passionate about it as you want to be, and that it's not really worth the toil and the effort that you could be putting into something else that feels more authentic and aligned. Aries is the exaltation of the sun, which just means that the sun also has a lot to do with this sign. And the sun is always going to be asking that question of authenticity, like we saw with the full moon in Leo at the start of the month, right? Does this feel true to you? Does this feel like it is representing what you want to pour your energy into? And if not, it's probably not going to stick around. Similarly, Saturn moving through the 11th house, it can bring up stuff around friends and being like, oh, I thought I was really kind of ingrained in this friend group. And now I'm realizing that maybe the foundations there aren't as sturdy as I thought they were, right? Maybe I want to build a stronger foundation with people who have aligned values and beliefs as me. And that might take a lot of work to be able to get that moving, right? That might look like pouring yourself into activist efforts, that are hard and challenging to be able to organize around, that are also so important, right? That say that actually it is worth showing up for, even though it's difficult, and even though it's not necessarily going to feel like I've got all of the support and the means to accomplish what I want to do here. Someone's got to do it. Saturn and Aries is very much like, well, I guess I've got to do it. I've got to take up the mantle because no one else is. And while that can be personally empowering, it can also feel really personally challenging and pressurizing and hard, right? We're trading Pisces problems for Aries problems. I always say when a malefic moves into a new sign, and Mars and Saturn are the malefics, which are, it's a literal translation of evil doer, right? They're the planets that bring about more difficulties and hardships into our lives. When they move into a new sign, we get different problems. We're always going to have challenges. We're always going to be facing difficulty in some area of life. Nothing is ever always 100% good. That is just the nature of reality, and astrology speaks to that. We have been doing a lot of building and crafting and reconstructing and dreaming and foundation building in Pisces since March of 2023. That's moving into Aries now. So you really take some time to reflect on how the last 2.5 years have gone for you, and think about where you are now and how whatever area of life Pisces corresponds with in your chart has changed. That's what we are about to undergo in Aries, right? We had Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Now we have Saturn and Neptune in Aries as of mid-February. So it is going to feel like a really big shift, and it's going to feel a little bit tough. It's put some pressure on the Aries part of our chart. And because Saturn isn't super powerful there, it can make it a little bit harder. But Saturn in Aries also has that audacity to go after it and to build the legacy along the way instead of planning everything in advance, right? It's like, what if we just tried? What if we just did the thing? And it can have a little bit of a my way or the highway kind of approach where it's riskier, it's bolder, it's less cautious, it's more egoic, right? Saturn is all about limits and suppression, and in Aries those things aren't really as readily accessible, so it's going to be a little bit more of like a building solid foundations through throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks and seeing what's inspiring, and then hopefully showing up and developing a discipline around whatever that area of life is so that you can build something long lasting even when you don't necessarily want to keep showing up for it. This is also going to activate the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune by sign again. So here we go. We are truly doing the Saturn Neptune thing for real and in some ways for good, right? We are going to get their conjunction just a couple days later on February 20th, and this is going to be mounting from that point in time, which can really distort our relationship and our dreams and our visions around what we want to build and what we want to create in the Aries part of our lives. I would highly recommend listening to the year ahead forecast that I did, because I did that with Chloe as well. And we talk all about Saturn and Aries and the Saturn Neptune conjunction at length. So check that one out. But you can kind of expect as Saturn moves into Aries on the 14th that the Pisces stuff is going to start to feel easier. It's going to start to feel lighter. It should really feel like someone's taken a weight off of that part of your chart and placed it into another one. And while that can make the Aries stuff feel harder, it should make the Pisces stuff feel easier too. And you've been going through a lot in that area of life, because it's not just been Saturn moving through there. It's also been Neptune, and it's also been the North Node. So we're having eclipses there at the same time, which means there's been some really rapid and long lasting shifts that have started to occur in Pisces over the course of the last few years. And it's probably going to feel really nice to get some of that pressure, that weight of expectation, that responsibility, that quest for legitimacy off your shoulders when it comes to that area of life. And if you've got a night chart and Saturn is just harder for you, right? Really expect to feel like there is less difficulty, less delays, in that area of life. Such a common one is that, like, Saturn moving through the 10th house in a night chart, if you've got a Gemini rising and you've got Pisces 10th, right? That it can be a time where it's harder to find work, or where you're forced to take a longer break or a sabbatical, or your career has been derailed, or you haven't been able to get the promotion that you've been seeking or make the changes that you want to make, that there's just like someone pressed a pause button. And at the same time as pressing pause, activated all of this change there that made you want to reach for and aspire to new heights in that area of life, and then just kind of getting told no, right? And that can feel really difficult. And if it's a no or it's a not right now, and we want it to be a yes, and we seek and crave and yearn for that success or that progress, that can feel really difficult. And this takes the pause and the no out of the equation, but it doesn't take the North Node out of Pisces. So there's still going to be that hunger for movement there, for progress there, for advancement there. And because Saturn is no longer going to be in Pisces, you're probably going to see a lot of the results and the payoff of some of those changes really start to sink in as Saturn leaves this sign. Even more so when Jupiter stations direct, because Jupiter rules Pisces and is ruling the North Node and is currently retrograde in Cancer at this time. But when Jupiter stations direct later in the year and is super dignified, and we've got the North Node there, that is going to be go time for the Pisces part of your life. So be ready for that. Be grateful for the fact that Saturn moving into Aries means that the Pisces part of your life and your chart gets a little bit of a break, while also being prepared for the fact that that doesn't mean that all problems disappear. They just shift into a new area of life. Like I said, if you want more on that, then listen to the 2026 forecast, because I think Chloe and I talked about it for like 45 minutes. Okay, the big one. February 17th, solar eclipse at 28 degrees of Aquarius. Eclipse season arrives. We are fully in it. This is going to be most intense for people who are in Leo or Cancer profection years, right? And also for anybody who has fixed placements at the final degrees of those signs, right? Of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. If you've got anything from around, 25 to 30 degrees, you're going to be feeling this eclipse pretty heavily. The funny thing about having a Leo or a Cancer perfection year is it's almost like it always shows up anyway, right? It's like, well, I know the eclipses are going to be more significant because the big things that the moon and the sun, the rulers of Cancer and Leo, do in the sky are eclipses, right? So it's kind of a natural thing saying like, hey, watch the eclipses, right? But whenever that happens, it's usually a year where all of the eclipses happen to fall on a sensitive point in someone's chart anyway, like a personal planet or an angle or the lot of fortune or spirit. It's usually there. It's pretty loud. And these eclipses are going to feel like they come in hot and they come in fast. Let me go ahead and bring up the chart for this eclipse so we can talk it through together. This is the first one we're getting in Aquarius. So it's going to be starting a new kind of change and a new storyline and the development and evolving of our approach to the Aquarius parts of our chart and the Leo ones as well. But this one is going to be a lot more focused on Aquarius in general. Now, I always say eclipses are agents of fate, and fate can be cruel and fate can be kind, right? It doesn't have an inclination towards one or the other. For some people, this might be really supportive. For other people, it might be more challenging. But on a baseline, this eclipse is a little bit tougher because of how close the sun and moon are to Mars, right? They're at 28 degrees and Mars is at 19 degrees. And the sun and moon aren't really aspecting much else besides also being in a tight square to Uranus. So we have the planet of revolution and change pinging this eclipse by square while also having Mars, who can really bring up some discomfort, some challenge, some conflict, all kind of getting boiled into this eclipse, which is in the Saturn ruled sign. And Saturn just moved into Aries. So there's a lot going on here. I would really start to think about how Saturn's initial transit through Aries played out for you from May 25th to September 1st of 2025, right? That is going to be your best kind of piece of data for understanding what's going to be revisited and built upon over the course of that transit. And this eclipse in Aquarius, even though it doesn't happen in Aries because it is ruled by Saturn in Aries, it is directly tied in to some of those painful creations that we are going to be working on and tending to over the course of the next 2.5 years, right? And this eclipse in particular, it's the first one in the series, so it's going to activate the kind of like new beginnings, new endings. I think Chris Brennan often says eclipses are like major beginnings and major endings in a certain area of life. And I definitely find that to be true. And this is kind of kicking off like a major beginning, major ending in the Aquarius parts of our life, but that is distinctly tied into the new beginning that is occurring in Aries. So think about the relationship between these two signs and these two areas of life, right? This is a Gemini rising chart that I have pulled up for those watching the video version, because that is when the eclipse goes exact in my location. And you can see that Aquarius is the 9th and Aries is the 11th. There is a question here around one's beliefs, traveling, learning, teaching, astrology, spirituality, all of those ninth house topics, and the communities that one is a part of. And so one of the ways that the storyline could play out is that there is a new desire to take a course, to learn something, to teach something, to travel, to understand a philosophy or a wisdom tradition, and then also a call to build community around that, right? With Saturn being in Aries. And you want to think about the houses that are getting activated in your chart to really understand what is showing up here. Now, because this eclipse is happening near the North Node, this activates a hunger for something new. So it does tend to be a little bit more of like I really want a fresh start here. I really want to create something here. I really want to build something and up level and see it reach new heights right now. But this also runs into a little bit of tension and conflict and discomfort because Mars is here, right? Mars wants us to take action immediately. And in Aquarius, we're a little bit more oriented towards Saturn's approach of being a little bit slower. And at the same time, we don't get to do that because Saturn's in Aries, right, next to Neptune. So there are new dreams and new visions being built and forming at this time that are informing some of these big changes that are happening in Aquarius. And the square to Uranus also is like, I need to change now, right? That there's going to be something surprising around the way that this shows up for us. There's going to be something unexpected about how this plays out, right? Mars brings that desire to take action immediately, but it also tends to push us towards wanting to be a leader, to be in charge, to have it done our way, to be in control, right? This is kind of like pushing things through the ether of like the ideal and into the here and now, right? Neptune is like, well, what could it be? And Saturn's like, well, what is it? Right. And this is kind of reckoning with where am I now? How far is that from where I want to be? And how do I start taking action to get a lot closer? And then potentially having some surprising elements come in that push you in an unexpected direction as some of this storyline really gets moving. Now, because Saturn is right next to Neptune, that can also distort clarity and bring a sense of confusion and sometimes even delusion into the picture as well. So it might not feel super clear. It's like, I know I want to achieve something in this area of life. I know I need to start over. I know I need to make a change, but I don't really know where I'm going yet. That's part of it. That's a feature, not a bug. That's okay. You don't have to have all of the answers as much as you might want them at this moment. Part of the thing with eclipses is that we lack clarity and visibility, right? There is a luminary being eclipsed, which means that a light in the sky is not there anymore. The lights bring an element of clarity and visibility and illumination. So when there's an eclipse, there is inherently something unpredictable, chaotic, that we are not seeing, right? So as you feel this kind of bubbling urge to go deeper into the Aquarius part of your chart, to change the way that you're approaching there, to have that up level in a different way, hold space for the fact that you might not exactly know even what the end goal is yet. And it might just be starting the seeding of like, wow, I really need to invest more time and energy and resources into this area of life because it's only going to become more and more prominent and important and pressing as we move through the year and we continue to get eclipses in these signs and we have the North Node officially enter into Aquarius in July. So yeah, there's a lot going on with this eclipse. And you can kind of expect to see a really big change in the way that you're approaching the Aquarius and Leo parts of your chart. And remember to think back to what happened on February 1st with that full moon in Leo, because that was the awareness and recognition of your personal philosophy to these areas of life and that emerging desire to fit in, kind of conflicting with the principle of being excluded or rejected or on the outside. This is really embracing being an outsider and saying that's okay, and I can want the recognition, but also maybe I don't need that right now to begin whatever it is that I need to begin in this area of life. And it's probably going to start to make you see yourself in a different light, one that is a little bit more detached from the notion of status and glory and acceptance, and really cultivating an acceptance around your uniqueness and the ways in which you are different and the ways in which you are approaching the Aquarius part of your life differently than the status quo suggests you might approach that area of life. So, casual, really chill stuff going on this month. It's gonna be a big one. The second eclipse is going to end up being in Virgo. We don't get that until March, but I am already seeing people around me and in my life who are having this eclipse and that one tied together in unique and interesting ways. So I actually know a Gemini rising who is going to be going on a foreign trip, like has to take a flight to go deal with fourth house, like family stuff, right? And that's because the second eclipse is happening in Virgo and the first one is happening in Aquarius, which is the ninth house for Gemini rising. There can be overlaps between those two eclipses that I would recommend kind of keeping in mind as you try to understand and deepen your awareness around what this emerging storyline is going to be for you. Okay. Now, as we continue through the month on February 18th, the sun is going to enter Pisces, which is great for anybody in a Leo perfection year because the sun is in detriment in Aquarius and will no longer be when the sun is in Pisces. So that is great. It is also going to bring an illumination and a spotlight onto the Pisces parts of our lives, especially because Mercury and Venus are already here. Now, I really like this, actually, dare I say, because we are essentially switching Neptune and Saturn in Pisces, which we've been doing for a very long time for the Sun and Mercury and Venus. And while their transits through this sign are a little bit shorter, it is still kind of helping us bring a balm and some healing into everything that's felt really hard and confusing and fuzzy and hazy in the Pisces parts of our chart for so long. And it feels like Venus is here to bring a little bit of care and ease and support. And Mercury is helping us reorient our approach to this area of life now that Saturn and Neptune are gone. And the sun pulls our attention there. It says this is important to acknowledge how these things have shifted, right? This also helps us kind of develop a little bit more of a compassionate demeanor. It helps us prioritize all of those principles of Pisces that we talked about earlier, like generosity and empathy. You know, it can feel like an inclination to be more connected to other people. And that doesn't mean that we have to forsake our boundaries in that process because now Neptune is not here, which makes that a little bit easier. This can also ignite kind of a desire to up level and become a better you, or kind of like lean into self optimization culture because of the sun's presence with the north node, right? It magnifies the solar complex, which is related to our identity and to our personhood. So there can be this kind of call of like, who am I really? And I need to understand this in the midst of the greater world that I'm a part of and my relationships and my priorities and my values, and really starting to think about how can I up level, you know? And sometimes that can be supportive and sometimes not so much. So just be mindful of the ways in which you might overdo it at that time because the North Node sets things on a path of overdoing it, right? It is like I always think of it as like a steroid, right? It puts whatever it's next to on steroids. It amplifies it, it brings it to another level, which is usually destructive in some way, shape, or form. And it makes the other thing feel like it's just bigger. It takes up more attention and more space, right? Like you go on steroids, your muscles get huge, right? And then you're more inclined to be like, well, what is going on there than like what's going on internally, right? There's a little bit more of that shift. And so when we have the sun kind of on steroids, right, it can really amplify the awareness of our personhood, of our self concept, and of how we are doing and approaching life and authenticity and our unique path and our visions and our ideals and our dreams. And whether or not we feel content with that. And because the North Node is not a point that brings fulfillment, it just brings hunger, we are rarely going to feel content with it when the sun is conjoining it. So if you're feeling really consumed by your own state of being, your own personal dramas and stories and all of that during this time, that is kind of par for the course. And it's going to be that way a little bit as the sun gets closer and closer to the North Node, which is going to be happening in late February. But yeah, sun enters Pisces on February 18th. And then on February 20th, we get the Saturn Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries. As I mentioned before, really just go listen to the year ahead forecast for this. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I've talked about it at length there, but it is going to amplify all of the ways in which our reality and our grip on reality is being distorted right now. Just look at the proliferation of AI videos and the inability to tell what is real from what is fake. That is probably the biggest Saturn Neptune signifier that we have, on top of the really weird way in which we are all living our lives amidst horrors, right? The destruction, like the how am I supposed to keep doing what I'm supposed to be doing every day in my material reality, right? That's the Saturn component, when there's all of these other things going on that feel like they are distorting my ability to show up. The collective kind of violence that we are experiencing, right? Between ICE, between all of the wars that are being waged right now, the benefits that are being cut for different people in the United States. There's so many ways in which people are suffering right now and in pain, and that we are still expected to just go about our daily lives. And this feels very Saturn Neptune to me. And I think we're going to see this kind of hit a peak when they do conjoin, right? The how am I supposed to go on and keep pushing and doing all of these things while also the world is burning around me? That kind of reality distortion where it's like we all kind of feel like we're living in like a novel, right? It's like we look around like, surely this can't be real. Surely this headline isn't actually a headline, right? Which I have that reaction multiple times every day. I feel like that is going to hit a high point when we get Saturn and Neptune conjoining on February 20th. And so if you feel that way right now, you're human, you're a part of this, and it's a very normal reaction to what is going on. And it's a sign of the times, is kind of the way that I've been thinking about it. So you're very normal if you're feeling that way. And the thing about the Saturn Neptune conjunction is that it doesn't just bring major beginnings collectively, it also brings them personally, even if we can't see it yet. This is happening at 0 degrees of Aries. It is the very first degree of the zodiac. It is the most new beginning thing that you could possibly see, right? Worlds are being born anew. And even if we don't always know that that's what's happening when something is being created, we don't know the impact and the legacy and the lifespan of what it is, it doesn't mean it's not starting. And this is truly an earnest start to a new world. And that can feel really disorienting. And Neptune doesn't help that either. A really good way to understand what's going to happen is, again, think back to what happened in your life from May 25th to September 1st. We had Saturn and Neptune in Aries around that time. And that is going to give you a little bit of an indicator of what you're going to be revisiting now and really continuing on with in a major way. Like if you started a project, then you might return to that project now and see it in a new light and kind of push it into a new form of being that then takes on a greater meaning and a greater significance than you can even possibly imagine right now. Of course, you want to think about whether or not, you're in a Saturn perfection year, an Aries perfection year. Those are going to be things that make this a lot more personally felt for you, along with anyone who has placements at early degrees of cardinal signs. You're going to be feeling this one more than most. It's a big one. It's one of the biggest transits of the year. And yeah, I'm very intrigued to see what happens in the world around us as those two rejoin one another in Aries, where Neptune and Aries, as I talked about last month, can kind of create like a idealization or glorification of the warrior, the commander in chief, the leader, the hero, and Saturn and Neptune conjoining at that time as we are starting to have our collective priorities around what we put up on a pedestal shift, right? And Saturn creates a foundation for that to kind of root into. It's going to be an interesting one. So that's the Saturn Neptune conjunction. I'm sure if you guys are listening to lots of astrology podcasts that you've probably heard about this at length, and it is for good reason. But one of the things to also remember is that with those things, you're probably going to be feeling a lot of the absence of Saturn and Neptune from Pisces, even as they start getting going and conjoining in Aries. Sometimes it's easier to notice when a weight is gone versus like a new weight being introduced, right? You can feel an ending sometimes more than you can recognize a new beginning. So keep that in mind. If it doesn't feel super significant for you, I would say this is a really good time to be journaling and to be kind of keeping track of what's going on, because the things that are being seeded right now are going to be very, very important in the years to come. All right, we got to finish this thing up. So February 26th, we've got Mercury stationing retrograde at 22 degrees of Pisces. We kind of already talked about this, right? This is a harder retrograde in general because Mercury is in detriment and in fall there. So the debilitation plus the retrograde is kind of like a very Mercury retrograde, right? Like expect all of the usual, but probably a little bit worse. Mercury retrogrades are rarely something to freak out about. I think that they get really, really overblown in kind of more pop astrology, right? And the thing is that it's just an inconvenience usually. It's like you miss your train, your flight's delayed, you buy something and the package gets shipped to a different place, and then you have to wait for 3 weeks, and it's really annoying, but it's hardly stuff that tends to be like worth writing home about, right? But this one is probably going to be more annoying because it's in Pisces. So what I would recommend is backing up all of your files, right? Keeping liquids away from your devices, right? Not taking any risks. I think the last time that Mercury was in Pisces, I spilled water on my laptop and had to break, or it broke and I had to replace it. And that always made me think about the relationship between water signs and Mercury moving through water signs and our electronics, right? A little bit more susceptible to damage or yeah, anything like that at this time. So just back up your files, be really mindful about the way that you say things, move with intention, speak with intention, purchase with intention, and really think about the ways that your values align with those different things, right? Like put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, with Mercury and Pisces. And you might find that even though it's challenging and even though it's difficult, that it can also really help you understand the landscape of Pisces now that Saturn and Neptune are gone. Like, I genuinely feel like, as annoying as the retrograde might be on the day in and day out with the tech and the transportation stuff and all of that, it's really necessary for us to do a little bit of exploration around this area of life now that so much has changed and that we've landed in a completely different place here, right? It's like it would be weird if we weren't rethinking our approach to this area of life now that we don't have these two massively powerful presences in this area of our charts anymore. Mercury and Pisces retrograde can also feel like you're losing the details and service of the big picture. And so try to remember when it's good enough. You know what I mean? And for anybody who's in a Mercury perfection, yeah, hold on tight. The retrograde Pisces combo is a little bit tougher all around, but we will get through it like we always do. And there's definitely some support for Mercury with Venus's co-presence. They are going to conjoin at the exact degree that Mercury stations retrograde at, which is 22 degrees of Pisces. And that is a little bit of a sweetness, of a support, of a recognition of our values and our desires that help us then shift the way that we are approaching this area of life. She is going to be what we call a bonifying Mercury, which is just a fancy technical way of saying she is bringing Mercury some aid. She is making things easier for Mercury. She wants to provide her resources, and she's got plenty of them by being in a sign where she does really well. So that conjunction does feel really sweet, especially for revisiting anything that is a little bit more relationally inclined in the Pisces part of your chart, right? If this is your third house or your 11th house, this could be great for calling an old friend that you've lost contact with. If it's in the 12th house, this might look like going back to a therapist who is really supportive for you. If it's in your fifth house, this could be returning to a creative project, or, making something with a friend and like having a craft night for something that you wanted to do a really long time ago and just weren't able to, right? Yes, retrogrades can be annoying, but they also feel in a way nostalgic because they bring us back into storylines that have already occurred. And Mercury Venus conjunctions, when Mercury is retrograde, can do that in a way that is also sweet and helpful and not always horrible and challenging and annoying. So lean into that on February 28th. It's definitely a sweet one and can be really good for doing some inner work as well around your thought processes, your ideologies, and also just your mental health in general, right? But yeah, Mercury Venus as a pairing is one that I always really like to see in the sky, retrograde or not. I think, you know, Venus brings a lot of aesthetic sensibilities to Mercury's more technical kind of orientation. You get the logic and the rationality of Mercury blended with something that is really inclined towards peace and harmony and beauty. So there's a lot of things to like about that conjunction, and it does, you know, kind of smooth over Mercury's station, which is otherwise a little bit nasty with everything else going on in the sky at that time. So February is going to be a big one. This is, to me, when the year really gets going between Saturn and Neptune, between the eclipses, this Mercury retrograde. It's probably going to feel like things start happening at a very rapid rate for you in your life. And thinking about who's your time lord, what perfection year you're in, right? All of that is going to help you understand where you are at and what you should be focused on or what you will be focused on during this time, because there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. And instead of trying to grab onto all of them, try to direct your focus and your intention where you might be able to see the most results for that effort. And, you know, just be ready for change. I think that's kind of the motto for all of 2026 is it is going to look very different at the end than it did at the beginning. So you have to be ready and prepared for things to shift. And if you are fighting that, then that is going to bring up a lot of internal conflict. And if you can kind of say, you know what, I know things are going to shift. I know things are going to move. I know things are going to shake and rattle and get a little bit weird, you know, then when it happens, it's not going to feel so overwhelming. Hopefully, that is my hope for you. That is my hope for me. We're all going through it together. And thank you for listening to this forecast. I hope February treats you as well as it possibly can. I'm excited to see you guys on the other side in March. And if you enjoyed this forecast and all of the rest of the content that I've got out for you guys, make sure that you like this video if you are listening on YouTube, subscribe if you're not already, and leave a review on Spotify or Apple if you are listening on one of those platforms. It really, really helps the show grow, and I really appreciate it. And if you really want to do the most, then go ahead and check out my patron page on my website, www.kirareiberg.com/exclusive content. That is where you can support the show. And there are so many benefits for joining. You get access to probably 100 different articles, monthly elections, video lectures, primary access to my booking link every month. So if you want to get a consultation with me, my patrons always get that first, and they tend to book me out before I can even send it out to my newsletter. So if you want to sit with me to get a little bit of a deeper understanding of how this stuff is going to be impacting you and your life and your chart, then you're definitely going to want to check that out. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.